So Representative Anna Eskamani is, I fangirl over her all the time. She she's the Florida House Rep for seat 47, just south of us in Orlando. She was just reelected to her second term in what I'm going to call a mandate. And she has her eye towards the future. And she has a lot of really smart things to say. Anna, are you hooked up to the audio?
I am. Hi, Chris.
Hi, welcome.
Thank
Come
you so
speak your
much.
wisdom.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for the invitation. And it is amazing to be with my Democrats in the villages. I just want to say good morning. Before the pandemic struck our state, I've had the chance to come and speak to you and to our Women's Club as well in the villages. And so it's wonderful to be connected through Zoom. And I hope I get the chance to see everyone again in person very soon. But as Chris said, my name is Anna Eskamani, and I'm proud to serve District 47 in the Florida legislature. Some more context, I was a first-time candidate in 2018. Before I ran for office, I grew up in Orlando. I'm the daughter of working-class immigrants. My parents came from two different parts of Iran, but met each other in Orlando working at the same donut shop. And my parents made this community their home. My dad went to the University of Central Florida while he was a waiter and became an engineer on the weekdays while working at Walt Disney World as a customer service representative on the weekends just to make ends meet. My mom had a degree from Iran she could not use, so she worked at fast food restaurants and eventually at Kmart. And that was her last job because in 2004, she passed away to cancer. And so a lot of what I do every single day is grounded in caring about everyday people and fighting for the rights of everyday people so that we can build a system where no kid loses a parent and no parent loses a kid, and we can prevent it from happening. Whether that takes shape as economic security, access to healthcare, reducing gun violence, in the case of the pandemic, stopping the spread. These are all issues that are very, very important to me and to my cat who is jumping on my table. And so to that point, my decision to run for office in 2018 was not a easy one. I had to seriously consider the potential of losing like we do in any campaign. So my first thought to this conversation today is just a big thank you, because we do have to lose a couple of fights to win. And even giving into a battle that is difficult, fighting as hard as you can, even when you might lose, is probably one of the bravest things anyone can do. So for everyone here that's volunteered and give it their all, for candidates who ran for office, I just want to say thank you, because I know what it's like and it is scary, especially when you're up against Trump supporters. It gets even more intimidating. And so to that point, I worked at Planned Parenthood for 6 years before I ran for office. And my Planned Parenthood story, like that of so many women, was as a patient. I walked into my high school and got absence-only education, which I just felt like was such a disservice, and set an uneven playing field for me being able to have bodily autonomy, to know what consent is, to protect myself and those around me. So I walked into a Planned Parenthood health center when I was 18 years old and left with a method of contraception that was right for me. And that was a game changer, because I remember looking down at this pack of birth control, realizing that not enough women and girls have this information, and that it's incredibly empowering to ensure that we empower women and girls to make their own decisions, and we respect that decision as well. So I ran for office because I love my hometown. I went to UCF and I'm getting my PhD right now. So I've always lived in Orlando and I love this. I love Florida as a state. I know our potential is real. And in that experience, flipped a legislative seat back in 2018. And like Chris said, we kept it. But we didn't just keep the seat. We actually increased our support in 2020. Our vote margin went from 11,000 to 18,000. And we flipped 4 precincts, including 2 precincts that went to President Trump. Now, of course, Central Florida is not the same as Miami, and Miami is not the same as the Panhandle, and That's not the same as Tampa. So I think what's so unique about Florida is that we do have like 5 different states in one, right? And the Villages are like its own little region that's attracting obviously a lot of folks that are looking to retire from every part of the country, including parts that are more conservative. One point that's very interesting about Florida is our political culture is impacted by transportation. And the examples I'll share is, I-95, right? The major highway that comes down, Florida's coast on the east side tends to attract a lot of Northeastern folks who come to vacation in South Florida and then eventually decide to retire in South Florida. When we look at Naples and Fort Myers, the major highway is I-75, which comes from the Midwest. And so those folks that come to vacation in Florida typically would drive down I-75, creating a very unique divergent in political culture. And then I think what's interesting about the Villages is that it was, it's kind of a hodgepodge, right? Because it's kind of in the middle, so it attracts folks of every background. And then anywhere where there's military bases in that pathway, like Brevard and Volusia County, for example, you do see another shift in political culture. So much of Florida's identity is also driven by history and by the highways that bring people here, or the boats that bring people here. And I think it's important to be aware of that as we talk about voter turnout and as we talk about how to win a state like Florida. A lot of the conversation has been, is Florida now a red state? And my response to that is, hell no. But I also want to say we're a blue state. Like, I think Florida requires a rainbow coalition to win. So let's talk about that a little bit more. And then I love to open it up for Q&A and see what folks have on their mind. So this past week, we hosted a forum. I'm not sure if folks were able to tune in. It had 10 different voices, and it was, kind of framed as, where do we go from here? And we had labor voices, we had Black voices, brown voices, white voices, young people, Muslim voices, Jewish voices. Like, it was a very cool, it's never going to be all encompassing, right? But it was a very cool display of Florida's diversity. And during that conversation, some key takeaways came out of it. And also just some takeaways that I've developed watching 5 seats disappear from the Florida House and watching 2 congressional seats go red in South Florida. And most recently losing JJR, Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, who is a climate justice advocate. And he lost his race in South Florida by about 35 votes. To get, these are some really tough wins and losses. And so my first reaction was, we do need new leadership, because the Florida Democratic Party tends to hire a lot of the same people, do a lot of the same projects. And even the Biden campaign hired a consultant to manage the state of Florida. And this individual, though I've known her for a long time, she has lost races statewide in the past as well. So it definitely seems like a culture of like choosing your friends to lead the charge because you know them and you're familiar with them, versus creating an environment that takes all candidates seriously and hires the best person for the job, versus someone that you feel safe with. And I think that's part of the practice. We need to get a little uncomfortable, right? And try new things and work with new people. And I do think there's a habit in Florida of choosing a lot of the same folks, whether they're working with the FDP or working with a coordinated campaign or independent expenditure. It's a lot of the same folks making decisions reflective of 2008 and 2012, where President Obama were on the ticket. And the reality is that President Obama is a very unique candidate, right? And you do need a candidate that inspires people. But when you don't have that type of candidate, then you have to rely on really strong operations on the ground, which brings me to my second point of just the lack of field. Now, COVID-19 impacted us, right? I mean, the Democratic Party was on the path of registering voters, expanding the electorate. And when COVID-19 hit, there was an intentional decision to stop voter reg and do vote by mail. However, the Republican Party has been organizing on the ground for more than a year, expanding their voter registration numbers, and candidly, not necessarily taking a lot of safety standards into mind, but continuing to organize while we were not present. Now, on our campaign, we never stopped field when COVID-19 hit, but we did reimagine field. So we were knocking on doors before the pandemic happened. I qualified for the ballot by petition before legislative session started in January. So we wanted to get it out of the way and also start our campaign early, because when you're knocking on doors or reaching out to voters, it has to be an 18-month journey. You can't start that 4 months in. You really have to start as early as possible in order to touch neighborhoods more than once and to have an impact and build a relationship with your constituents. And so we did make the decision to stop door knocking when COVID-19 hit Florida, but we didn't stop field. What we did is we took our field operation and we turned it towards public health. So we started calling constituents, not asking for a vote, but asking, how can we help you? And delivering really essential public services. I saw in the chat, Melanie, for unemployment. And so that's exactly what we did. A lot of our unemployment work was not just led by our legislative staff, it was led by our campaign volunteers that stepped in to help us because the load was huge. And we also wanted to touch as many people as possible to see how can we help you. So we developed a relationship with our district that wasn't just me coming by asking for a vote, but it's me coming by to build a relationship with you so you can begin to see that when you vote Democrat, good things happen, right? Like when you vote Democrat, we're going to make sure you have money in your pocket and we're going to make sure you can pay your bills on time and that you're not going to get evicted. And so I think there's something to be said about Democrats organizing in a transformational way versus just transactional. And how do we show up in our communities 24/7, which we can dive deeper into as well. Because that's what RPOF is doing. Like they're showing up in festivals, they're showing up at people's doors, they're showing up all the time. And granted, they have unlimited resources to do that. So we're always struggling. We're never going to have as much money as they do, but there are volunteer-driven tactics to explore that can allow us to continue building relationships even when there's no campaign. The other suggestion I would offer is we don't have a message. Like we literally don't have a message. And it was funny. I was doing an interview and, the host asked me, are you suggesting that Democrats go more left? And I was like, no, I'm suggesting that we just have a message. And so I even look at, Amendment 2, right? The Fight for 15 $15 minimum wage amendment. This has been an overused example, but I think it's a good one, where Amendment 2, an issue that Democrats have been fighting for years. I mean, I have been on the picket line with Fight for 15 when I was in college at McDonald's, trying to get McDonald's to increase people's wages. And that issue passed, 60% of the vote. No statewide candidate has ever won, that type of vote count. But the Democratic Party was very shy as a whole to anchor its candidates to be associated with Amendment 2. And even our top Democrat, Commissioner of Agricultural Nikki Fried, was very soft. The Tampa Bay Times interviewed her, and she said she wasn't supporting it at the time. And it wasn't until there was internet backlash that she put out a very soft op-ed, now kind of endorsing it. But it was a reaction. It wasn't something, proactively thought of as a good strategy. And my assumption to why some Democrats are soft on these issues is because of corporate influence. Major corporations were against Amendment 2. That was the biggest group that was lobbying against it, alongside the Republican legislature. Actually, there was a press conference with the Senate president and the Speaker of the House talking against Amendment 2. And it was a missed opportunity for us as Democrats, because we could have not only anchored ourselves around Amendment 2, but we could have used it as a contrast to our opponents. Because when it comes to messaging and communicating to the electorate, it's all about contrast. And it's also about knowing your enemies. The Republican Party is very good at defining enemies. There are three main attacks in Florida: were socialism, defund the police, and the PPP loan program, which I don't know if folks have context of the PPP loan, but quick story, PPP was a federal program out of the CARES Act that provided funds to small businesses to pay their employees while they were closed. And the Democratic Party applied for a PPP loan. And that became a big controversy. They said they returned the money, but the damage was done and it was used, all the time against Democratic candidates who had nothing to do with it, but they were labeled as being corrupt and, you know, taking money that should have went to small businesses. So if you don't have a plan of attack to respond to those type of messaging points, and if you don't have your own message to pivot to, it's going to be very difficult to cut through the crap. And I would also add that when you have a field operation on the ground, it makes it easier to cut through the crap. And I say that as somebody who has experienced this. I mean, my first campaign, my opposition spent $500,000 attacking me, 25 pieces of mail, 3 TV commercials. You know, they called me extreme, partisan, vulgar, anything under the sun. That was me. And we fought back. You know, we had a ground game where we already had met our constituents, so they knew who we were. But then every time I was attacked, I posted online and gave it as ammunition to my supporters to fight back. And so we didn't see a lot of contrast to the socialism, you know, a name calling or defund the police. And I think there are some pretty easy messages to do. I mean, in particular, there's nothing more socialist than Republicans picking winners and losers, cutting tax breaks to their donors while they benefit from public health plans, you know, and so there are ways to contrast this, but you didn't really see that happen. And then the last thing I'll say for opening up, and I see some questions in the chat already, which is awesome. But you know, I've seen a lot of people want to run away from strong democratic issues. And again, I would really caution against that, because I don't think it's about winning Republicans. Like, at the end of the day, if you have extra dollars, then you try to win over Republicans in your campaign. But you want to build your universe around those that you know support you, if you can just get them out to vote and find them. And so with that point, there are incredible values that do transcend party lines. I mean, I look again at my campaign, I am not a subtle Democrat, but we inspired Republicans to vote for us because they see us on the ground. They know that their life will improve, their safety will continue when they vote for someone like me. So I think that there is something to be said about just having basic values, and values can transcend party lines. But it's about having values. And so many Democrats, because they accept corporate donations, because they kind of toe the status quo line, they don't provide any values that are very unique or compelling to get out new voters, you know, and to help dismiss the attacks that folks are facing. And so yeah.
I'm gonna just jump in with the first question. It's one of the few benefits of being me.
Sounds great, Chris.
One of the things that I saw happening, particularly in South Florida, was the misinformation campaign. You touched on it. Defund the police, socialism. And it was targeted well via Spanish language podcasts, influencers on YouTube. And I don't see that the Democrats here or really elsewhere have a mechanism to fight that. And while I recognize it will take a chunk of money to set up something like that, it needs to be set up last year.
Right.
And so can you speak to that?
I'd love to. You know, I remember when Mike Bloomberg announced his huge investments in Florida. You know, I went to the Biden campaign. I said, hey, are we going to spend this on Black and Brown radio? and here's the thing too, it's not even just spending the money on radio stations or podcasts that are multilingual and you know, speak Creole or speak Spanish, but those are influencers in their communities. Like it's also about getting to know the DJ, and the DJ is then going to post on their Instagram account or, you know, on their WhatsApp network about you. So it's very much driven as well by just those relationships being built. And, you know, the first reaction I was given was, well, this money is independent expenditure. We don't decide how it's spent. So that $100 million went to the PAC that was managed by Steve Shale. And because you can't coordinate, you know, I have no idea how they spent that money, but they obviously didn't spend it where they should have. They probably just bought more TV ads and more like
That's
streaming
exactly.
ads,
Yeah.
right? But not like radio and and to combat the disinformation. To that point, there was a really like frustrating article in the New Yorker about the Biden campaign's lack of Hispanic outreach. I don't know if folks have seen this, but I mean, it makes you angry because the article starts with one of their organizers like emailing their state director and others asking for help in Miami-Dade because they saw the numbers. They knew they weren't going to win. And that email got no response. So there also just seems to be like a complete like just neglect, of Spanish speaking communities who, to your point, became vulnerable to the exploitative campaigns and misinformation, voting against their best interests. And so the infrastructure to build that is very simple. I mean, like you said, Chris, you start building relationships now within these communities. I mean, if we're talking about 2020, it just started 2 years ago. The first community I reached out to in my district, I should be clear, my district is about 80% white. So this is a district of established Orlandonians. Like we've been here, a lot of folks have been here for a long time, but we have a growing Puerto Rican and Venezuelan community on the southeast side and a historic Black community that's been gentrified called Hannibal Square. The first group I met with when I made the decision to run for office 3 years ago was Hannibal Square, because this is a group that has been ignored in the city of Winter Park. They experience cost rate disadvantage. They have really difficult housing issues. And we have built a long lasting relationship. Like it's incredible, like how close we are and how we trust each other. With our Spanish speaking folks, we have supported the small businesses in the area. We frequent them. We get to know the community leaders there at the faith level. And during this campaign, we did Spanish language literature drops, Spanish language phone banking, text banking, and ads. And I have to tell you, out of all of our different investments and organizing activities, the Spanish language contacts were some of the strongest. People responded back to our text messages asking for help about voting. And my gut reaction to that is, I don't think a lot of Democrats were talking to this community. Like, I think we were some of the only people they even heard from, because as we know, a lot of folks get sick and tired of text messages because they get so many of them. But you can tell for this community, there wasn't that many text messages because they were actually happy to hear from us. And so again, begs the question, what type of Hispanic outreach was even happening in the first place? And talking to many of my friends that are a part of the community, it doesn't seem like there was a great deal of relationship building or communication happening.
Thanks. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that as the months go by. And so go ahead and grab a question from the chat.
Sure. Well, I see some questions about like defund the police, right? So let's talk about that. Defund the police was never a Democratic message, right? Defund the police came from Black and brown activists on the ground. I call it the movement family. Like it comes from a movement space, but it's our job as Democrats to not accept language like that, not to fall for language like that, and to really define it on our own terms. Now, in my district, we did a poll, and I know polls have been, raising lots of eyebrows. I think there's a whole other conversation about just data in general and how good or bad our data really is. But I will tell you, we did a poll in our district, and we didn't poll defund the police. We polled, do you think it would be, would you support a decision by a local city to allocate dollars away from law enforcement to housing and mental health to make the job of law enforcement officers easier? Like that was basically like the phrase, and it's not verbatim, but it was in those terms. And overwhelmingly people supported it, right? But to that point, I still never that wasn't one of my main campaign points, right? I was ready to answer the question if it was asked of me, but I think when you want to dismiss something like defund the police, it's really important to not forget the Black and brown folks in your community that maybe they also want to keep the police. Trust me, when I was knocking on doors, I met a woman in Hannibal Square, an older Black woman, and her response to me was how she tells the police what to do because she's worried about a drug dealer down the street. And so she was bragging to us how she calls the police and the police do what she tells them to do. And so every situation is like so nuanced, right? But to that point, like, I'm not here to defund the police, but what I will say is that we have a mass incarceration problem. 96,000 people are incarcerated in Florida right now, mostly men of color. And we got to do something about it. And so that's why I support repealing mandatory minimums, ending the school to prison pipeline, and investing in rehabilitation programs so folks who leave prison don't come back. So you have to have the, like, go ahead and toss out the term as trash, but be able to still pivot to points that don't completely ignore the needs of communities impacted by incarceration. I don't know if that makes sense, but when we talk about messaging, there's a really great tool called a message box. So imagine a box that has 4 boxes inside, right? So you have 4 different messaging questions you want to ask yourself. One is, how do we talk about us? So how do we talk about our campaign or our work or our mission, right? So us on us. Then you do us on them. So how do you talk about your opposition, right? And then it's them on them. How do they talk about themselves? And then finally, how do they talk about us? That 4th box is so freaking important. And what frustrates me about a lot of this is it's not like we could not have guessed they would attack us on these issues, right? Like you should be able to predict the they on us months in advance. And I remember my first campaign, we actually filmed a commercial to respond back to attacks before the attacks even happened, because you're just ready for it. Of course they're going to call me like all sorts of things. And so we had filmed a commercial that was titled, "Why Are They Afraid?" And the entire point of the commercial was, of course my opponents are going to lie about me. Why are they afraid? Well, because I'm going to stand up to special interests. And we went back to our main point. We didn't let them define us, but we knew they would try, right? So I think that's a part of it too.
All right. Representative Eskamani, thank you so much. I have career aspirations for you. I will share with you at a later date. I have great plans for your career. Thank you so much, as always, Anna, for coming in.
Thank you, Chris. It's awesome to see everyone. And I'll put my email in the chat so we can keep in touch. And yeah, definitely here to help any way I can. And again, just thank you for your work. We have to keep, like you said, Chris, keep our eyes on the ball. Don't lose focus. Georgia can do it. So can we. And so, yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.